Georgia is known for its sweet tea, southern hospitality, and beautiful sprawling forests. But beneath that picturesque surface lies a much darker reality. Today, we're looking at the 10 most shocking and mysterious disappearances in Georgia history, cases that completely defy logic and leave more questions than answers. If you love deep dives into the unexplained, please hit that subscribe button and give hype points. Now, sit back, dim the lights, and let's get into it. Imagine you're standing in the middle of the woods. It's January, the kind of cold where your breath fogs up in front of your face. The trees are bare, but the underbrush is thick and tangled. You can hear every leaf crunch, every branch snap. Sound travels in winter woods like nothing else. You're working a normal job. 3 of your coworkers are within shouting distance. One of them is 50 feet away from you, close enough that you can see his back, close enough that he's mid-sentence asking you a question. He turns around to look at you, and you're gone. No scream, no footsteps running away, no rustle in the bushes, no tire screech in the distance, just silence, and an empty patch of dirt where you were standing 60 seconds ago. This is the case of Christopher Tompkins. And almost 25 years later, it remains one of the most physically impossible disappearances ever recorded in the state of Georgia. Let me put you in the moment. The date is January 25th, 2002. The location is Harris County, Georgia. Specifically, a stretch of deep timberland near Georgia Highway 85 and County Line Road, just outside a tiny town called Ellerslie. Now, if you've never been to that part of West Georgia in January, let me paint it for you. This is not the manicured forest you see in a state park. This is raw, working timberland, the kind of woods that swallow you whole. Dormant winter underbrush, thick and gray and brittle, old barbed wire fences cutting through the trees, marking property lines that nobody pays attention to anymore. Pine needles ankle-deep on the ground, and the timber overhead so dense in spots that even at 1 in the afternoon, the light gets that strange, filtered, oppressive quality. But here's what matters most about these woods. They're loud. I don't mean noisy, I mean acoustically sensitive. Every step crunches, every branch you brush against snaps. You couldn't sneak through these woods in January if your life depended on it. The dry leaves and the cold snapped twigs make sure of that. It was a normal workday, a boring workday, honestly. And working in those woods was a 20-year-old kid named Christopher Tompkins. Christopher was a young black man, about 5 feet 7 inches, maybe 130 pounds, small build. He was easily recognizable that day, wearing a blue and gray plaid jacket with a hood pulled up against the cold navy blue Dickies work pants, tan FUBU work boots, and a black skull cap. He had braided hair and this really distinct tattoo on his right arm. His nickname, Chris, written vertically inside an ice cream cone, except the ice cream scoop was drawn as the head of a joker wearing a hat. It was creative. It was his. Christopher was a land surveyor. And let me tell you what that job actually is, because it matters. Surveying is methodical, paid, physical work. You're out there with a crew, clearing sight lines through the brush, taking measurements, marking property boundaries. It's the opposite of glamorous. It's also the opposite of a job you walk away from in the middle of a shift. You're on the clock. You're with coworkers. You've got equipment in your hands that costs more than you make in a month. Christopher was reliable. He was good at his job. He lived with his mom. He wasn't running from anything, wasn't hiding from anyone. He was just a 20-year-old kid doing a regular Thursday afternoon at work. So let's get into the timeline of what actually happened. And I want you to pay close attention here, because the entire mystery lives inside about a 60-second window. The crew that day had 4 men. Christopher was the 4th, the last one in line. The way a surveying crew works is they fan out in a vertical formation, walking through the brush, each man spaced about 50 feet apart. That's the standard distance. Close enough to communicate, far enough that each guy can do his job without getting in the other's way. They'd been working all morning, standard stuff. By the time the early afternoon rolled around, it was roughly 1:30 p.m. They were chatting back and forth as they moved through the woods. Just normal banter, crew talk. The third surveyor in line, the one closest to Christopher, turned his head away to say something to the second guy. That's it. He just turned his head, maybe to ask a question, maybe to make a joke. We're talking about a moment that lasts, according to investigators, somewhere between 30 seconds and a minute. Then he turned back, and he called out a question to Christopher. No answer. He called again. Silence. Now, here's where I need you to really sit with this. The guy is 50 feet away. That's the length of like 4 parking spaces. He can see the spot where Christopher was just standing, and Christopher's not there. So he walks over, he pushes through the brush, he looks around, he calls for Chris, he keeps calling. The whole crew converges on the spot. They yell, they search, they listen. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Christopher Tompkins, in the span of one turned head, has been erased from those woods. Now this is where the story stops making physical sense. And I need you to track with me here, because the details of what they found are genuinely strange. Let's break it down logically. If Christopher had decided to just walk off the job, just up and quit on the spot in the middle of his shift, you'd hear it. Those woods, again, are loud. Dry leaves, dormant winter brush, those snap-prone January twigs. You can't tiptoe through that terrain. And he wasn't going to set a land speed record in heavy work boots through tangled underbrush. There is no version of this where he simply walks away quietly. If he was attacked by an animal, say a wild hog or a black bear, there's a scuffle, there's a scream, there's blood, there's a body, or at least pieces of one. Animals don't make a 130-pound man disappear cleanly in 60 seconds without leaving so much as a smear on the dirt. If he was attacked by a person, even worse. You're talking about subduing a grown man, in heavy boots, in tangled brush, in less than a minute, without him making a single sound, and without his 3 coworkers 50 feet away noticing anything at all. How do you do that? You don't have time to gag him. You don't have time to wrestle him quietly. You're working with maybe 45 seconds. And here's where it gets weirder. Because they did find things. They just didn't find Christopher. Let me tell you about the boot. Right near the spot where Christopher had been standing, his co-workers found one of his tan FUBU work boots, and the boot wasn't on the ground. It wasn't tossed in the bushes. It was hanging from a nearby barbed wire fence, suspended there, by the laces. Think about that for a second. If you're running, your boot doesn't unlace itself in mid-stride and hook neatly onto a fence. If you're being dragged, your boot might come off, sure, but it ends up on the ground, in the leaves, dropped behind. It doesn't get carefully snagged on a wire. The boot was placed, or it was the result of something so violent and so specific that it literally tore him out of his footwear and flung the boot up onto the barbed wire. But here's the thing. If it was that violent, where's the blood? Where are the drag marks in the dirt? Where are the broken branches? The crime scene around that fence was, by all accounts, almost completely undisturbed. And there's more. Caught on the barbed wire fence itself, investigators found a strand of blue fiber. Forensically, it matched Christopher's navy blue Dickies pants. So something happened at that fence. He went over it, or under it, or through it, hard enough to leave a piece of his clothing behind. And then, scattered near his abandoned surveying tools, the crew found exactly 12 cents in loose change. 12 cents. Now ask yourself, if you're being violently dragged or you're sprinting in panic, your pocket change goes everywhere. It scatters, it bounces, it rolls. 12 cents lying neatly next to a man's work tools? That doesn't look like flight. That looks like he was hoisted straight up out of his clothing in place, like he was inverted. His pockets just emptied where he stood. And then there's the kicker, the really unsettling detail. His other boot? The second tan FUBU boot. They didn't find it that day. They didn't find it that week. They didn't find it that month. They found Christopher's other boot in July of 2002. 6 months later. Now, think about what that means. Either the initial search grid completely missed it, which is possible but suspicious, or wildlife scattered remains, which means there were remains to scatter and they were never found. Or, and this is the dark one, somebody came back to those woods months later and dropped that boot, which is the most unsettling theory of all, because that would mean whoever or whatever took Christopher knew exactly where he'd been taken from and was confident enough to revisit the scene. So what are the actual theories here? Let's talk about what law enforcement initially said. Brace yourself, because it's a doozy. The official theory, at first, was that Christopher simply walked off the job, that he just decided to wander away and start a new life. Now, this is the kind of theory that infuriates families of missing people, and you can understand why. Christopher had no reason to leave. He was on the clock. He had his paycheck coming. He had his surveying tools, expensive equipment, just sitting on the ground. He had one boot still on his foot. Where exactly was he going to walk to, alone, in the freezing January woods with one boot? The voluntary departure theory was a slap in the face. It also conveniently ignored every piece of physical evidence at the scene. The fiber on the fence, the hanging boot, the scattered change. His family and his community have always pushed back hard against that explanation. They've raised two more grounded theories. The first is that something happened with the crew itself. An argument, an accident, an altercation that escalated. Maybe Christopher said the wrong thing. Maybe there was tension we don't know about. Maybe one of the guys lost it, things went bad, and the rest of the crew closed ranks to protect each other. It would explain the silence. It would explain why nobody heard a scream. But it doesn't explain the staged-looking evidence at the fence, and the crew has consistently maintained their story for over 20 years. The second theory is darker. It suggests that Christopher accidentally stumbled into something he wasn't supposed to see. Those rural West Georgia woods, even in 2002, were known to hide things: clandestine drug operations, illegal poaching camps, other criminal enterprises that depend on isolation. If Christopher wandered slightly off his line and saw something he shouldn't have, the people running that operation would have minutes to silence him. And those kinds of people would know how to move a body fast and quietly. But again, even that theory hits the wall of acoustic reality. How do you silence a 20-year-old man so completely, so instantly, that 3 coworkers 50 feet away never hear a thing? So here's where we are, almost 25 years later. No body has ever been found. No suspects have ever been charged. No definitive evidence has ever surfaced to point in any one direction. The case has been quietly cataloged by Georgia investigators, mostly forgotten by the mainstream press, but it lives on in missing persons communities, in online forums, in the kind of case files that fans of the missing 411 phenomenon obsess over. Because Christopher Tompkins' disappearance doesn't just feel weird. It feels like it violates the basic physics of the world. A young man, on a clear winter afternoon, in noisy woods, 50 feet from 3 witnesses, vanishing in under 60 seconds, leaving behind a boot hanging from a barbed wire fence, a thread of fabric, and 12 cents in loose change. That's it. That's all that's left of him. He was standing right there. 60 seconds, and then nothing. Just a boot on a wire and a mystery that the woods of Harris County have never, ever given back. Picture this. A small hair salon sitting right off a busy 4-lane highway in suburban Georgia. It's the middle of a Thursday morning. Cars are flying by every few seconds. Inside, a microwave just finished beeping. A woman's lunch is sitting on the counter, still warm. The phone has just gone quiet after a customer called to reschedule. Everything is completely, utterly normal. 13 minutes later, she's gone. Not dead in the salon, not injured in the parking lot, just gone. Vaporized. And to this day, more than 20 years later, nobody has any idea how it happened. This is the case of Patrice Endres. Let me set the scene for you. It's April 15th, 2004. Cumming, Georgia. If you've never been, Cumming back then was the picture of bland, safe southern suburbia. The kind of place that was rapidly transitioning from sleepy farmland into Atlanta's northern overflow. Strip malls, soccer practice, sweet tea. Highway 369, also known as Matt Highway, cuts right through it, and on that highway sat a little business called Tamber's Trim and Tan, a hair salon, nothing fancy. Just one of those neighborhood spots where the same women came in every 6 weeks, sat in the same chair, and gossiped about the same kids. And the woman running that salon was Patrice Endres, 38 years old, wife mother, and by every account I've read, she was the absolute heart of that place. Her clients loved her. She knew their families. She remembered their birthdays. Owning this salon was her dream, and she had finally built it from the ground up. But the most important thing to understand about Patrice is her relationship with her 15-year-old son. His nickname was Pistol. And these two were inseparable. Her morning routine, every single morning, ended the same way. She'd drive him to school, look him in the eye, tell him she loved him, and say she'd see him that afternoon. That's the woman we're talking about. Not a drifter, not a runaway, not someone with a secret life waiting to be triggered, a mother whose entire world orbited around a teenage boy who was waiting for her at 3 p.m. Now, here's a wrinkle that matters later. Patrice wasn't happy in her marriage. She was married to her second husband, Rob Endres, who was about 20 years older than her. People close to her say she was quietly thinking about divorce, but thinking about leaving your husband and vanishing into thin air in broad daylight, those are two completely different universes. Hold that thought. We'll come back to it. So let's get into that morning, April 15th, 2004, a Thursday. The weather was mild. The salon opened on schedule. Her first client of the day was a woman named Pam Shepard. Pam shows up around 8:50 a.m. for her 9 a.m. appointment, and right away, she notices something is off. Patrice, who is usually warm and chatty and locked in on her clients, seemed distracted, agitated, short, not rude exactly, but somewhere else. Pam finishes up and leaves around 11:05. 5 minutes later, a man named Paul Cantor walks in for a haircut. He's in the chair getting trimmed, totally normal interaction. He leaves at 11:27 a.m. We know this exact time because his cell phone records confirm a call he took the moment he stepped outside. So now Patrice is alone in the salon. And here's where the clock starts ticking. At 11:35 a.m., the phone rings. It's another client calling to reschedule. Patrice picks up. The conversation is brief. She sounds, again, kind of short, kind of distracted. The call ends at 11:37 a.m. That is the last confirmed second that Patrice Endres existed on planet Earth. Because at 11:50 a.m., just 13 minutes later, somebody tried to call the salon. It rang and rang. Nobody picked up. And at 12 p.m., two of Patrice's regular clients walked through the front door for their noon appointments. The salon was empty. But here's the thing. It wasn't ransacked. It wasn't trashed. There was no blood, no overturned chairs, nothing knocked off the shelves. The scene was eerily, perfectly preserved, like someone hit pause on her life in the middle of a routine afternoon. Her lunch was sitting next to the microwave, still warm to the touch. Her purse, right on the counter, her car keys, right next to the purse, her cell phone, still there. But the cash register was open. The cash was gone. And then there was the car. Patrice drove a black Chevy Tahoe, and every single client who came to that salon knew how Patrice parked. She always backed her SUV into a specific spot on the side of the building, right next to the side door. Every time, without fail. It was muscle memory at this point. That day. Her Tahoe was sitting at a weird, awkward angle directly in front of the salon, facing the wrong direction, like somebody had moved it in a hurry and didn't know her routine. The clients called 911 immediately, and just like that, Patrice Endres had stepped into a 13-minute void. Now, this is where I have to stop and say, wait a minute, let's actually break down what we're being asked to believe here. 13 minutes, 780 seconds. That is the entire window an abductor had to work with. In that time, somebody had to pull up to a salon on a busy 4-lane highway, walk inside, somehow subdue a healthy, capable 38-year-old woman, empty the cash register, force her out of the building, get her into a vehicle, and drive away. All without anyone driving by noticing anything. All without leaving a single sign of struggle inside. All without her screaming. All without her grabbing her phone. All without her grabbing her keys to defend herself. How? How is that physically possible? Because think about it. If this was a random robbery, a junkie looking for cash, the smash and grab happens and they run. They don't take the hairstylist with them. You don't kidnap a witness from a glass-fronted salon at noon on Highway 369 unless you came there specifically to take her. This wasn't opportunistic. This was a hit. But if it was a hit, if it was planned, then whoever did this knew her schedule. They knew Paul Canner would leave at 11:27. They knew the next appointment wasn't until noon. They knew that 33-minute gap was the only window when Patrice would be completely alone. That's not a stranger. It's somebody who'd been watching. Which brings us to her husband, Rob Endres. Now, I want to be very fair here. Rob has never been charged with anything. He had what investigators called an airtight alibi. He was at work. He could account for his time. Police looked at him hard and could not pin anything on him. But here's what we do know. And I'm just laying out the facts. The day after his wife disappears, while half the county is still hoping she'll walk through the door, Rob Endres changes the locks on their house within 24 hours. He locks her 15-year-old son, Pistol, out of the home. The boy who was waiting for his mother to pick him up from school, locked out. Now ask yourself, if your wife vanishes under terrifying circumstances and you genuinely believe she might still be alive and trying to come home, what's the first thing you do? You leave the porch light on. You sit by the phone. You don't immediately go to a locksmith and make sure she can't get back in. That's not the behavior of a man holding out hope. That's the behavior of a man who already knows she's not coming back. And it gets stranger. Years later, after her remains were finally found, Rob Endres publicly admitted to some genuinely disturbing things. He engaged in deeply disturbing behavior with her physical remains once they were returned to him. He kept her remains in a cardboard box at the bottom of his closet, and when her grieving son asked for a portion of her ashes, his own mother, he refused to share them. I'm not telling you Rob Endres did it. I'm telling you that's the behavior. You take from that what you will. Of course, Rob wasn't the only suspect on the board. Investigators looked at two known serial killers operating in Georgia at the time. The first was a guy named Jeremy Brian Jones. And Jones actually confessed. He gave granular, specific details about where he dumped her body, sent investigators to a creek. They searched. Nothing. Jones was a known false confessor, the type who eats up the attention. The second was Gary Michael Hilton, a name that gives Georgia true crime fans chills. Hilton was a drifter, a predator, and his known dumping ground was the Dawson Forest, which becomes relevant in a moment. But again, no physical evidence ever directly connected Hilton to Patrice, so we're left with this awful triangle. A husband who acts guilty but has an alibi, a false confessor who lied, and a serial killer whose hunting grounds line up perfectly but whose fingerprints aren't on the case. And the salon? The salon held its secrets. No DNA from a stranger, no clear suspect car, no traffic camera footage. In 13 minutes, someone managed to commit a crime on a public highway in broad daylight and leave less evidence than most people leave behind at a coffee shop. 600 days. That's how long Patrice Endres stayed missing. 600 days of her son going to bed not knowing. 600 days of clients glancing at her empty chair. And then, on December 6th, 2005, behind a small church in Dawson Forest, about 11 miles from the salon, somebody found skeletal remains. It was Patrice. The body had been left in an area Gary Michael Hilton was known to frequent. But again, no definitive link. The forensic evidence was too degraded after that much time outdoors to tell investigators what they desperately needed to know. They couldn't determine cause of death with certainty. They couldn't lift DNA. And there was one more detail. One last little knife twist. Patrice's wedding ring, two bands soldered together with a distinctive marquee diamond, was missing from the remains. Never recovered, never pawned, never traced. Somebody took it. Somebody kept it. Somebody, somewhere, may still have it sitting in a drawer. So here's where we land. A 38-year-old mother went to work on a Thursday morning. She made small talk with her clients. She warmed up her lunch. She answered a phone call at 11:37 a.m. And by 11:50, she had been completely erased from the world. The salon was open, the highway was busy, the cars were passing, the microwave was still warm. But Patrice was gone. And whoever did it, however they did it, has spent every single day since that Thursday in 2004 walking around free, going to the grocery store, watching the news, maybe even driving past the spot where it happened. Patrice Endres stepped into a 13-minute void, and she took every answer with her. Picture the scene. It's 1:30 in the morning. You're standing in the parking lot of the biggest country music nightclub in the state of Georgia. The doors are still open. The bus is still thumping through the walls behind you. The lot is a sea of pickup trucks, neon signs buzzing overhead, drunk college kids stumbling toward their cars, and security guards directing traffic with flashlights. You're an 18-year-old kid. You're standing right there, in plain sight, with hundreds of people around you. You're on your phone, frantically calling everyone in your contacts list, trying to find someone to drive you home. 30 minutes later, your phone goes dead. And so do you. Nobody sees you leave. Nobody sees you get into a car. Nobody sees a struggle. Nobody hears a scream. And almost 20 years later, nobody knows where you went. This is the case of Justin Gaines, and what happened in that parking lot is one of the most logistically impossible disappearances in modern Georgia history. Let me put you in that night, November 2nd, 2007. Duluth, Georgia. The early hours of a Friday morning, technically, because the disappearance happens after midnight on a Thursday into Friday party night. The location is Wild Bill's. And if you weren't around in the mid-2000s in the metro Atlanta area, I have to explain to you just how massive this place was. Wild Bill's wasn't a bar. It wasn't a nightclub in the regular sense. It was a country and western mega club. We're talking about a venue the size of a warehouse, multiple dance floors, mechanical bull, stage for live bands, the kind of place that could legally pack in thousands of people on a busy night and routinely did. And November 1st, 2007 was Thirsty Thursday. Thirsty Thursday at Wild Bill's was the night. College students from every campus within an hour's drive descended on the place. Cheap drinks, country music, line dancing, cowboy boots, and miniskirts. The crowd that night was estimated at over 3,000 people. 3,000 people. I want you to hold on to that number. The parking lot outside was by necessity enormous. Acres of asphalt, off Pleasant Hill Road in Duluth, in Gwinnett County, right in the suburban guts of metro Atlanta. The lot was its own ecosystem. Tailgaters drinking before going in, couples making out in trucks, security on patrol, off-duty cops directing traffic in and out at peak hours. At 2 a.m., when the club closed, that lot turned into chaos. 3,000 impaired people flooding out of a single set of doors, scattering toward their vehicles. In the middle of all that, somewhere, was an 18-year-old kid named Justin Glenn Gaines. Justin was a freshman at Gainesville State College on the Oconee campus. He was 5 feet 11 inches, about 210 pounds, muscular. He was a weightlifter, buzz cut, diamond stud earrings in both ears. By every account, he was a good kid from a good family. Polite, funny. His mom, Erica, raised him with the kind of relationship where she had explicitly told him multiple times that he could call her at any hour of the night for a ride home. No questions asked, no lectures, just call. That detail matters. Hold on to it. Justin came to Wild Bill's that night with friends. He carpooled, which means he didn't have his own vehicle on site. He was relying on his ride to get him back home. He went in to have a good time. He had a roll of cash on him. He was flashing it around a little bit. He was also, by witness accounts, pretty heavily impaired. Whether it was alcohol or something else or a combination, by midnight, Justin was not at full operating capacity. And in a club of 3,000 people, somehow Justin and his friends got separated. It's not hard to imagine how. You go to the bathroom, you can't find each other again, you assume you'll meet up later, and later never happens because the place is just too big and too loud and too packed. That's where the spiral starts. Let me walk you through the timeline as we know it. Around 11 p.m., Justin enters Wild Bill's. He blends right into the crowd. At 11:38 p.m., the interior security cameras catch him. He's partying. He's having a good time. The footage shows him flashing that roll of cash and wearing those diamond earrings. And here's a hard truth about that environment. Flashing cash and jewelry in a club full of 3,000 impaired strangers, you're painting a target on yourself. There were absolutely people in that crowd, watching him and clocking him as easy prey. I'm not saying that's what got him. I'm saying he was visible in a way that mattered. The hours pass. Music, drinks, dancing. Standard Thursday night chaos. At 1:30 a.m., exterior surveillance cameras pick him up again. This time, he's walking out of the club. He's by himself. He's heading into the parking lot. And from this moment forward, his phone records tell the story. Between 1:30 and 2 a.m., Justin is making call after call. He's burning through his contacts, friends, acquaintances, anyone he can think of who might be able to come pick him up. He's trying to get a ride to Snellville, where he was supposed to crash. He's not panicked yet. He's just stranded. Without his ride. Without his car. Without his wallet. Just standing out in the cold parking lot of a mega club, working his phone like a teenager who's had a long night and just needs to get home. And here's the moment that breaks his mother's heart. Forever. Among all the calls he was making, there's one number that never appears on his records. He never called his mom. He had a standing invitation. He had absolute permission. He could have called Erica Gaines at 1:45 a.m. and said, "Mom, I'm at Wild Bill's. I'm stuck. Please come get me." And she would have been in the car within 30 seconds. But he didn't. Maybe he was embarrassed. Maybe he was too impaired to think clearly. Maybe he thought he'd get a ride from someone closer. We will never know. Just before 2 a.m., he makes his final phone call, and then his phone goes dead. Powered off, run out of battery, taken, smashed, we don't know. But the signal stops. And Justin Gaines, 210 pounds of muscular 18-year-old kid, evaporates from a parking lot containing 3,000 people. Now this is where you have to stop and ask yourself the obvious question. How? How is that physically possible? Let me lay out the logistics for you. Closing time at a club like Wild Bill's is the absolute worst possible time and place to quietly abduct a person. That parking lot at 2 a.m. was not empty. It was its most crowded moment of the entire night. Thousands of people pouring out of the doors, couples arguing on their way to their cars, bouncers and security still on duty, off-duty cops actively directing traffic to prevent drunk drivers from killing each other in the lot, headlights cutting across the asphalt in every direction. If somebody grabbed Justin, dragged him into a vehicle, anything violent or even mildly suspicious, somebody would have seen it. Somebody would have heard it. A 210-pound muscular kid does not go quietly. He fights, he yells, he resists. But there's no witness, not one. In a parking lot of thousands of people, not a single human being saw anything happen to Justin Gaines. So that leaves you with one realistic option. He didn't fight, which means he went willingly with whoever took him. And that's where the blonde decoy theory comes in. Investigators and witnesses over the years have suggested that Justin was approached in that parking lot by a woman, a blonde woman in a black dress. The theory goes that she offered him a ride. He was desperate. He was impaired. His guard was completely down. He'd been calling friends for 30 minutes with no luck. And a pretty girl walks up and says, "Hey, I'll give you a lift." Of course he gets in. That theory explains everything that the physical impossibility creates. No struggle, because there wasn't one. No screams, because he didn't know he was in danger. No witnesses, because to anyone watching, it just looked like two young people getting into a car together. Completely normal Thursday night into Friday morning behavior. And if that's what happened, then Justin walked himself into the trap. Now, here's where the case takes a turn into a labyrinth of confessions, dead ends, and rumors that have driven investigators absolutely crazy for years. In 2015, 8 years after Justin disappeared, a career criminal named Dustin Dylan Glass started talking. Glass was a gang member with a long rap sheet. He confessed to assaulting Justin and stealing his diamond earrings. He didn't admit to killing him. He pointed the finger at another man, Martin Leonard Wilkie. Wilkie was later arrested for concealing a death. The story that came out of those confessions was horrifying. The claim was that Justin was lured from the parking lot to a house in Snellville. Once there, he was beaten. Then he was shot to death. His body was allegedly stuffed into a toolbox. and then the toolbox was supposedly dumped in Lake Lanier. Then, the story shifted. Dustin Glass's mother, a woman named Thelma Ruth Ballou, claimed that when Justin's body resurfaced from the lake days later, she helped move it again. She claimed she relocated his corpse to a well somewhere in Walton County. Investigators took this seriously. They had to. They spent an entire week excavating the well she pointed them to. They found nothing. Not a bone, not a thread of clothing, not a single trace of Justin Gaines. Thelma Ballou was eventually arrested for making false statements to law enforcement. So which part of that confession was true? Any of it? All of it? Was the well a lie but the lake real? Was the lake a lie but the house in Snellville real? Was the entire confession a piece of organized misdirection designed to exhaust the police and send them chasing ghosts in the wrong county? And here's the logic gap that drives this whole case crazy. If Justin was killed in that Snellville house, there were multiple people in the room. The confessions point to a group. A house full of people watched a kid die, and in 18 years, not one of them has cracked. Not one of them has cold conscienced their way to a detective's office and given up the truth. No deathbed confessions, no drunken bragging that made it to the wrong ears, no girlfriend who got mad and made a phone call. In any group crime, somebody talks eventually. The bigger the group, the faster the leak. So either the group is very, very small, or the people involved are so deeply entrenched in a culture of violence and silence that nobody dares speak. Some investigative podcasters, including the team behind Drowning Creek, have suggested this points to deeper organized criminal activity in the Snellville, Barrow, and Walton County corridors. The kind of underworld where talking gets you killed. The kind of silence that's enforced. And as long as that silence holds, Justin Gaines stays missing. Erica Gaines, Justin's mother, has spent every single day since that November morning hunting for her son. She's done the interviews, she's pushed the police, she's followed every tip, no matter how dark or how dubious. She's chased down rumors that broke her heart and led to nothing. She's the kind of mother who refuses to let her son become a footnote. Wild Bill's itself eventually shut down. The Mega Club, the place that defined Thursday nights for a generation of Georgia college students, closed its doors. The building was repurposed, the neon went dark, but that parking lot is still there. The asphalt is still there. The spot where an 18-year-old kid stood with a dying cell phone, calling everyone he could think of, is still there. So here's where we land. Justin Gaines was last seen on a security camera at 1:30 a.m., walking out into the world's most crowded parking lot. He was on his phone. He was trying to get home. He was 30 seconds away from making the only phone call that would have saved his life. The phone call to his mom. He didn't make it. He stood under the neon lights. He made his last call to a friend who couldn't help. The line went dead. And somewhere between that final dial tone and 2 a.m., in the middle of 3,000 people, Justin Gaines was erased. He was right there. We can see him on the tape. We can hear the timestamps of his last calls. We know exactly where he was standing. And we have absolutely no idea where he went. Picture this. It's 2 in the morning. A massive 24-hour Walmart supercenter, the kind of place that's so brightly lit it almost hurts your eyes. Fluorescent ceilings, linoleum floors, cameras in every corner, watching every aisle, every register, every exit. This is one of the most surveilled environments in modern American life. A young woman, panicking, breaks free from a loss prevention officer at the front of the store. She kicks off her flip-flops. She drops her purse. She abandons her cell phone, and she sprints, barefoot, out the automatic doors and into the parking lot. The cameras catch all of it. They watch her run across the asphalt. They watch her disappear into a tiny patch of darkness on the edge of the lot. And then she's gone. She doesn't come out the other side. She doesn't appear on any other camera in the area. Not the diner across the way, not the gas station down the road, not the traffic cams on Cobb Parkway. She just steps into a shadow at 2:02 a.m. on a Friday morning in 2013, and she never steps back out. This is the case of Tiffany Whitton, and it's haunted Marietta, Georgia ever since. Let me set the scene properly. The date is September 13th, 2013. The location is a sprawling 24-hour Walmart supercenter on Cobb Parkway, U.S. Route 41 in Marietta, Georgia, suburban Atlanta, about 30 minutes north of downtown. If you've never been to that exact stretch of Cobb Parkway, let me describe the vibe. It's not pretty. It's a 4-lane commercial highway lined with fast food restaurants, used car lots, gas stations, motels, and big box stores. At 2 a.m., the daytime traffic is gone, but it's not empty. 18-wheelers are rolling through. Third-shift workers are coming and going. People on the rougher end of the local addiction scene are out, drifting between gas stations and parking lots. It's a liminal zone, bright pockets of fluorescent commercial lights surrounded by stretches of complete darkness, with tangled, overgrown woods pressing right up to the edges of the parking lots. That contrast matters. The Walmart itself is a fortress of light and cameras. But 10 feet past the edge of the parking lot, you're in a different world. Pitch black, trees, underbrush, the kind of woods that even local cops don't love walking through after midnight. And in the middle of all this, that night, was Tiffany Michelle Whitton. I want to talk about Tiffany honestly, because her life mattered, and the way her case was treated tells you a lot about how the system works. Tiffany was 26 years old. She stood 5 feet 3 inches, had blonde hair and blue eyes. She was a mother of 2, and she was in the worst stretch of her life. She was battling severe, heavy addiction to illicit narcotics. She was on parole for a 2011 home invasion. She'd recently been fired from a nearby IHOP for theft. She was in a deeply toxic relationship with her boyfriend, Ashley Red Caudle, the kind of relationship where it was hard to tell where her self-destruction ended and his started. Her 2-year-old daughter was being raised primarily by Tiffany's mother, Lisa Daniels. So yeah, Tiffany was struggling, and on the night she disappeared, she was visibly impaired. Witnesses and cameras both confirmed she was high. But here's the thing that the police missed, and the thing that anyone who actually knew Tiffany will tell you. She was fiercely devoted to her daughter and her mother. She called her mom constantly. She checked in. She'd disappear on a bender for a few days, sure, but she always surfaced. She always came back. She always picked up the phone eventually. Tiffany wasn't a ghost. She was a struggling young woman with an iron tether to her family. And that's the thing that the dismissive, she's just another addict who took off theory always ignored. Let me walk you through what happened that night. Earlier in the evening, Tiffany and Ashley Caudle had been hanging out at a friend's house, a guy named Stephen Weinstein. They consumed heavy amounts of narcotics that evening. By the time they decided to head out into the night, Tiffany was deep in it. Around 1 a.m. on the morning of September 13th, the couple pulled into the Marietta Walmart in a borrowed truck. They walked through those automatic doors and into the bright fluorescent ecosystem of a 24-hour superstore, and the cameras started watching. The CCTV footage from that hour is honestly hard to watch. Tiffany is visibly out of it. She's pushing a cart up and down aisles. She fills it, she empties it, she fills it again. She's grabbing things and putting them down. Her movements are erratic, frantic, disorganized. Loss prevention officers, watching from their monitors, clock her almost immediately. They see her stuffing items of clothing into her bag. About $20 worth, total. Cheap stuff. For an hour they watch her, they wait. Around 2 a.m., Caudle approaches a register and pays for a single item, a speaker, with cash. Then, the couple makes for the exit, and that's when loss prevention moves in. 2 officers intercept them at the front of the store. The confrontation is on camera. There's no audio, but you can read the body language. Tiffany is panicking. She knows she's on parole. A shoplifting charge means jail time, real time. An officer reaches for her purse strap, and in that single frozen second of a 26-year-old woman's life, she makes a choice. She lets go of the purse, she kicks off her flip-flops, and she runs. The CCTV captures her sprinting toward the automatic doors, barefoot, empty-handed. She bursts out into the parking lot at 2:02 a.m., just gone, like a shot. Now this is where I have to stop and really hammer the strangeness of what happens next. Because here is where the Whitton case stops being a simple shoplifting incident and starts being something genuinely impossible. The Walmart parking lot at 2 a.m. is a brightly lit, camera-saturated environment. Multiple exterior cameras track Tiffany as she runs. We see her, barefoot, sprinting across the asphalt. She's headed northwest, away from the store, toward the edge of the property where a stretch of woods sits adjacent to a small diner. The cameras follow her. They follow her. They follow her. And then there's a gap. A small, specific zone where the angle of the exterior cameras doesn't quite reach. A tiny blind spot at the edge of the lot where the woods begin. Maybe 20 or 30 feet of unmonitored ground. She enters that blind spot, and she never comes out. That's it. That's the whole thing. She doesn't reappear on the camera at the diner next door. She doesn't show up on the cameras at the gas station down the road. She doesn't appear on any traffic camera. The Cobb Parkway corridor at 2 a.m. had cameras pointed in every direction by 2013, and not one of them ever caught Tiffany Whitton again. Now, ask yourself the obvious question. How does a barefoot woman in the middle of suburban Atlanta on a major commercial highway with eyes everywhere vanish into a tiny patch of woods and never reappear on a single camera in any direction? You have a few possibilities. She kept running through the woods and went deeper into them. Possible. But barefoot? In tangled underbrush? Not far, not fast. And she'd still have to come out somewhere. Marietta isn't wilderness. Those woods are bordered on all sides by businesses and roads with cameras. Or she didn't keep running. She stopped because somebody was waiting. Somebody pulled up in a vehicle in that exact blind spot, and she got in, voluntarily or otherwise. The vehicle then pulled out onto a side street that didn't have a camera angle covering it. Or the third option, which makes me sick to consider. She didn't make it through the woods at all. Something happened in that tiny gap of darkness, and the woods, or whoever was in them, kept her there. Now let's talk about Ashley Caudle, because his behavior that night is the second logic gap that breaks this case wide open. When Tiffany ran, screaming his name from the front of the store, what did Ashley do? Nothing. He didn't chase her. He didn't try to defend her. He didn't push past the security guards. He didn't even leave the store immediately. The CCTV shows him standing there, watching, while his girlfriend, the mother of his child's age, Piers, ran barefoot into the dark. He eventually walked out of the store with her abandoned purse. The purse contained her phone, her money, her ID, everything she would need to get home or call for help. Now you tell me, if your girlfriend just ran into the night barefoot, panicked, intoxicated, and unable to contact anyone, what do? You drive around looking for her. You call her mom, you call the cops, or you don't because of the warrant situation. Fine. But you do something. Ashley Caudle did the opposite of something. He walked over to the IHOP next door. He sat down on a bench. He played with Tiffany's phone. He waited for his friend Stephen Weinstein to come pick him up. And he went home. He didn't tell Tiffany's mother she was missing. He didn't report it to the police. He told friends a story about pulling a weapon on the security guards to help Tiffany escape, which never happened and was contradicted by the CCTV. He claimed he tried calling Tiffany's phone to find her in the parking lot, which was an impossible lie because her phone was sitting in the purse he was holding. And the next day, he deep cleaned the borrowed truck. He scrubbed the interior. He vacuumed it out. He destroyed any potential trace evidence that may have been in that vehicle. That is not the behavior of a guy who's worried about his missing girlfriend. That is the behavior of a guy with something to hide. So why didn't the police hammer Caudle from day one? Because of something criminologists call the less dead phenomenon. When a missing person has a record, when they're an addict, when they were last seen committing a crime, the system treats their disappearance as inherently lower priority. The assumption is that they took off voluntarily, that they ran from a charge, that they'll turn up. Tiffany checked every one of those boxes. She had a parole violation hanging over her. She was clearly running from a shoplifting bust. She was a known addict. So the early response from law enforcement was, more or less, she'll come home when she runs out of money. Precious months passed. Witnesses' memories faded. Whatever trail existed in those woods grew cold. By the time anyone took her disappearance seriously as a probable homicide, the trail wasn't just cold. It was buried. And then there's the strangest footnote of all. In January 2014, 4 months after Tiffany vanished, Her half-brother Blake claimed he received a phone call, a weird call through some secondary messaging app. The voice on the other end allegedly used his childhood nickname, Mudbug, a name only family would know. He believed it was Tiffany. The call was never traced, never verified. It exists as a single ghost data point in an ocean of nothing. A tip came in that Caudle and his associates had killed Tiffany and stuffed her in a concrete-filled barrel that they then dumped off the Bethany Bridge into Lake Allatoona. Sonar found a barrel-shaped object 40 feet down. Divers went after it. It turned out to be a chunk of construction debris. The case stalled, and it stayed stalled. Eventually, a journalist named Tom Junod wrote a long-form piece for Esquire that brought national attention to Tiffany's case. He didn't write it because he had answers. He wrote it because he was trying to understand why a young woman could disappear in the middle of suburban Atlanta, and nobody at any TV network wanted to make her face into the next true crime headline. Why Tiffany Whitton wasn't worth covering when other missing women were. Junod's piece woke people up. It got new tips, it got new attention, but it came years too late for the trail to be warm again. So here's where we land. A 26-year-old mother of two, in the middle of the worst stretch of her life, made the wrong call inside a Walmart on a Friday morning. She panicked, she ran, she kicked off her flip-flops, dropped her phone, and sprinted out of the bright fluorescent doors into the night. The cameras watched her go. They tracked her across the asphalt, and then, for a tiny gap of maybe 30 feet, they lost her. That's where she still is, inside that gap. She was there 1 second on camera, and the next, she was just gone. Picture a 17-year-old kid walking down the sidewalk of a quiet, upscale subdivision. He's dressed up. He's wearing the kind of outfit you wear to a school dance, a nice shirt, a vest, slacks, maybe a hoodie thrown over the top against the pre-dawn cold. It's 5:30 in the morning on a Sunday. Fog is hanging low over the manicured lawns. The streetlights are still on. The houses on either side of him are dark and quiet, full of sleeping families. He sends a text on his phone. "I'm on my way." Then he sends another text. Something stops him. A car, a person, something. He tells his girlfriend that a police officer just pulled him over and is asking him questions. A few minutes later, he sends one last text. He says it's really cold outside, and then his phone goes silent, and nobody ever sees him alive again. This is the case of Blake Chappell, and for 14 years, that 5:30 a.m. text about a police officer sent everyone chasing the wrong monster. Just like the last case we covered, this one was eventually solved in 2025. But the way it stayed unsolved for 14 years, the way it generated one of the most enduring conspiracy theories in modern Georgia true crime, and the bizarre forensic details that still haven't been fully explained, make this case worth understanding from beginning to end. Let me set the scene. The date is October 16, 2011. The location is Newnan, Georgia. Specifically, a planned community called the Summer Grove Subdivision near the town of Sonoya. You might know Sonoya even if you've never been there. It's a small, picture-perfect southern town about 40 miles southwest of Atlanta. Brick storefronts, manicured squares, the kind of town that looks frozen in some idealized version of 1955. Sonoya is famous now as the filming location for The Walking Dead, but in 2011, it was just a quiet pocket of Coweta County, the kind of place where parents felt genuinely safe letting their teenagers stay out late. The Summer Grove subdivision was that vibe taken to the extreme. Big houses on winding streets, perfect lawns, connected by a unique little network of paved golf cart paths that ran between the various sections of the neighborhood, so kids and adults could move between properties without ever stepping onto a real road. At 5:30 a.m. on a Sunday in October, that subdivision was completely, totally silent. The kind of silence you only get in a wealthy suburb in the pre-dawn hours. No cars, no dog walkers, no joggers, just streetlights glowing against the early fog and the occasional porch light still on from the night before. It was the kind of place where nothing bad was supposed to happen, which is what made what happened next so deeply unsettling. Blake Tyler Chappell was 17 years old, a student at East Coweta High School. By every single account from everyone who knew him, Blake was the absolute best kind of kid. Sweet-natured, polite, gentle. He had an infectious laugh. He had real dreams. He wanted to be a lawyer or a TV news anchor. He was articulate. He was kind. He loved to bake candy apples for his neighbors. He was famously, passionately into Halloween. Even at 16, he would still dress up in costume and go trick-or-treating just because he loved the holiday that much. That's the kind of person Blake was. On the night of October 15th, 2011, he was glowing. He had just attended his high school homecoming dance with his girlfriend, a girl named Rian. They had gone to dinner at a sushi restaurant beforehand. He was happy. He was dressed up in a homecoming outfit. He was 17, and the world felt good. After the dance, Blake went to his friend Austin's house in the Summer Grove neighborhood to spend the night, standard high school weekend stuff. But Blake had a teenage moment. He decided, sometime in the middle of the night, that he wanted to see his girlfriend Ryan. So he snuck out of Austin's house and started walking. 3 miles, in the freezing pre-dawn cold, in his homecoming clothes, just to sneak into his girlfriend's bedroom window. He successfully got into Rian's house, and he almost immediately got caught by her grandmother. Here's where you see the kind of kid Blake was. He didn't argue. He didn't get defensive. He was deeply apologetic. He told Ryan's grandmother he was sorry for the intrusion. He left the house at around 5 a.m., ready to walk the 3 miles back to Austin's place. As he walked, he sent text messages to Ryan and to her mother, apologizing for being there, apologizing for waking everyone up, just kid being sorry texts. That's our timeline up to 5 a.m., a polite, embarrassed teenager walking home in the cold. Now, this is where the case turns. At 5:30 a.m., Blake sent a text to his girlfriend that has shaped the entire investigation for over a decade. He told her, and I'm paraphrasing here, that a police officer had just stopped him and was aggressively asking him for his identification, asking him where he was going. A few minutes after that, he sent one more text. He complained about how bitterly cold it was outside, and then nothing. The phone went silent. Blake disappeared. He never arrived back at Austin's house. He never sent another text. He never used his phone again. 2 months later, on December 19th, 2011, some passersby noticed something in a creek near a bridge on Summer Grove Parkway. It was Blake. His body had been dumped there, in the water, in the woods bordering the same subdivision he had been walking through that night. He had been killed by a single, fatal gunshot wound. And the way they found him? That's the part that turned this case into a 14-year obsession. Now let me tear into the logic gaps, because this case is built on impossibilities stacked on top of each other. First impossibility: the silent neighborhood. It is 5:30 a.m. on a Sunday in October in a wealthy, quiet subdivision full of sleeping families. If someone pulls up to a teenager walking on a sidewalk, gets out of their car, and tries to force that teenager into the vehicle, that is not a silent event. There's a struggle, there's yelling, there's a car door slamming, there's tires on pavement. By 2011, the Summer Grove subdivision had cameras, security systems, outdoor lights with motion sensors. People had ring-style doorbells just starting to roll out. Dogs were behind a third of those fences. A 17-year-old in a homecoming suit fighting for his life on a sidewalk should have triggered something. Some camera, some bark, some neighbor coming to a window. Nothing. Not one piece of evidence from any single property suggests a struggle occurred in that subdivision that morning. It was as if Blake just got plucked off the sidewalk by something silent. Second impossibility: the gunshot. Whoever killed Blake shot him in the head. A gunshot in a quiet suburban subdivision at 5:30 in the morning, when the air is cold and dense and sound travels for miles, would echo like a cannon. Every dog within half a mile would lose its mind. Every light sleeper would jolt awake. Somebody would call 911 about a possible gunshot. No 911 calls, no reports of a gunshot, no nothing, which means one of two things. Either Blake was not killed in the subdivision, or he was killed somewhere on the property where the sound was muffled. A garage, a basement, a car interior. And if he wasn't killed in the subdivision, then we have to accept that someone successfully kidnapped a 17-year-old boy in the middle of a quiet neighborhood, took him to a secondary location, killed him there, and then brought his body back to dump it in a creek bordering that exact same subdivision. all without leaving a single witness, a single piece of physical evidence, or a single camera capture along any of those routes. And then there's the third anomaly, the state of his body when they finally found him. This is the part that fueled 14 years of conspiracy theories. When Blake was found in that creek in December, he was not wearing his homecoming clothes. He had been stripped almost completely down. He was wearing only his undershirt and his underwear. His pants were gone. His shoes were gone. The warm hoodie he had been wearing against the cold was gone. His wallet was gone. His cell phone was gone. Why would a killer take the time to strip a teenage boy in the freezing October cold before murdering him? Two theories. Either the killer was doing a forensic countermeasure, removing outer clothing that would have been covered in trace evidence, blood spatter, fibers, DNA. Or the killer was doing something deeply, deliberately humiliating to Blake before he died. A sadistic move, a power move. Both options are deeply disturbing. And then there's the text that haunted this case for 14 years. Blake said a police officer had stopped him. When the Noonan Police Department and the Coweta County Sheriff's Office did their internal audits, they confirmed that no legitimate law enforcement officer made a pedestrian stop on Blake at 5:30 a.m. that morning. No dispatch call, no patrol car logged in that area, no officer on duty in that quadrant. So who stopped Blake? This is where the case generated a decade plus of conspiracy theories. The most popular one was the rogue cop theory. The idea that a real police officer had accidentally hit Blake with his cruiser or had engaged in a panicked, unjustified shooting and then covered it up by stripping the body and dumping it in the creek. Internet sleuths ran with that theory for years. Local rumors hardened it into accepted fact for some people in Coweta County, and the police could never fully shake it. Because the simple, undeniable fact was that Blake's own last words to his girlfriend named a police officer. How do you investigate around your own institution being named by a murder victim's final text? The other interpretation, the one that turned out to be closer to the truth, is that Blake had used the term police officer loosely. Maybe what stopped him was someone in a vehicle with a spotlight, or with what looked like a uniform, or with the swagger of pretend authority, a predator impersonating a cop, or just an aggressive adult who confronted him with enough force that Blake assumed they had to be police. For 14 years, this case sat. The conspiracy theories grew. Blake's family lived with the unbearable weight of not knowing. Then, in September of 2025, the Noonan Police Department announced an arrest. His name was Scotty Elliott Smith, a 38-year-old man with a long criminal record. He had not been on the original suspect list back in 2011. He had flown under the radar of the entire 14-year investigation. But renewed case reviews, new corroborating facts, and modern investigative techniques eventually circled back to him. Detectives brought him in, they interrogated him. And across multiple interview sessions, Scotty Elliott Smith fully confessed to the murder of Blake Chappell. He was charged with felony murder, aggravated assault, possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony, and concealing the death of another. The exact motive, the reason Blake's clothes were removed, the specifics of what happened during those final minutes of his life, all of those details remain sealed pending the legal process. Smith has procedurally pleaded not guilty as the case moves toward trial. We don't yet have the full picture. But the giant institutional conspiracy that hung over this case for 14 years collapsed in one arrest. No corrupt cop, no cover-up, just a local predator who had been hiding in plain sight in the same county Blake's family had lived in the entire time. So here's where we land. Blake Chappell was 17 years old. He went to his homecoming dance with his girlfriend. He ate sushi. He laughed. He danced. He made the dumb, sweet, completely teenage decision to sneak across town to see his girl at 4 a.m. He got caught. He apologized. He started the walk back. At 5:30 a.m., somebody stopped him on a sidewalk in a quiet subdivision. He texted his girlfriend that he thought it was a police officer. He sent one more text about how cold it was. Then the phone went dark. For 14 years, his family lived without an answer. The town of Noonan lived with a conspiracy theory that wouldn't die. And a man named Scotty Elliott Smith lived a normal life in Coweta County, drinking coffee, paying bills, walking past Blake's old friends in the grocery store, holding on to the secret of what he did one foggy October morning. He sent a text saying, "I'm on my way," but he never made it to the door. A 59-year-old woman drives 60 miles north of her home, completely alone, into the rugged Appalachian foothills of North Georgia. She walks into a Family Dollar store in a small mountain town. The security cameras catch her on tape. She's calm. She's by herself. Nobody is following her. Nobody is gesturing at her from outside. Nobody is pressing a gun into her ribs from inside her sweater. She buys a very specific list of items: a tarp, a torch lighter, paper towels, a rain poncho, a tote bag. She walks out of the store. She gets back in her rented minivan, and exactly 22 minutes later, her adult daughter receives a Venmo payment, almost $2,400, with a message attached. The message says, and I'm going to give you the exact phrasing, "They are not going to let me go. Love you. There is a key in the house in the blue flower pot by the door." The next day, her body is found at the bottom of a steep ravine in Tallulah Gorge, naked, partially burned, clutching a small tree. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation eventually ruled that she took her own life. The internet absolutely refuses to accept that ruling. And honestly, when you look at the details, you can see why. This is the case of Debbie Collier, and it might be the most psychologically baffling crime scene in modern Georgia history. Let me put you in the moment. The date is September 10th, 2022. The location starts in Athens, Georgia. A normal, sunny Saturday in a normal, bustling college town. Athens is home to the University of Georgia. It's loud, it's young, it's full of brunch spots and football fans. Debbie Collier lived a completely standard life in this normal environment. She was 59 years old, married. She had an adult daughter named Amanda Bearden. She managed a real estate office. By every external measure, she was just a regular American woman going about a regular American life. The thing about Debbie's story is that it ends almost 100 miles away from her starting point, in a place that couldn't be more different from suburban Athens, Tallulah Gorge. If you haven't been, Tallulah Gorge is one of the most dramatic natural features in the southeastern United States. It's a 2-mile-long canyon carved through the Appalachian Mountains by the Tallulah River. The cliffs plunge almost 1,000 feet straight down, waterfalls cascade through it, the forest around it is dense, rugged, and treacherous. The terrain is the kind of thing where you can step 5 feet off a trail and find yourself sliding into nowhere. Now you've got the two ends of the map: mundane suburbia on one end, a 1,000-foot canyon on the other. Debbie Collier is about to travel between them in a single afternoon. Let me talk about Debbie as a person, because the small details matter. To her co-workers, to her husband, to her daughter, Debbie seemed stable, routine, the kind of woman who managed an office, paid her bills, made dinner. There was nothing visible about her life that signaled crisis. But in the days leading up to September 10th, there had been little subtle things, out-of-character things. She had unexpectedly taken the entire week off from work without much explanation. Her daughter, in hindsight, noticed that Debbie had recently started giving away personal items, small things, possessions handed off without obvious reason. Those are, in retrospect, the kind of behaviors that a mental health professional will tell you can sometimes precede a profound decision. But in the moment, they were quiet, easy to miss, easy to explain away. There's one more detail. Debbie had a bad back, seriously bad, the kind of chronic back issue that limited her ability to walk on uneven ground, let alone hike. Climbing down a steep ravine in the Appalachians would have been physically excruciating for her, even on a good day. Hold on to that. It matters in a minute. Let me walk you through the timeline. September 9th, 2022, the night before. Debbie's husband goes to bed at 9 p.m. and reports that this is the last time he sees her in the house. September 10th morning. Her husband leaves for work. He notices her rented Chrysler Pacifica is still parked in the driveway. He assumes she's still inside the house, maybe sleeping in. He goes about his day. At some point that morning, Debbie gets in the rented minivan, and she starts driving north, 60 miles, up Highway 441 into the mountains. At 2:55 p.m., the security camera at a Family Dollar in Clayton, Georgia, captures her. Clayton is a small mountain town deep in Rabun County, way up in the northern tip of Georgia. The footage shows Debbie alone, completely alone. She walks through the store. She picks out items methodically: a rain poncho, a torch lighter, which is the kind of refillable lighter you use for tough outdoor jobs, a 2-roll pack of paper towels, a reusable tote bag, and a tarp, a 7.5 by 9.5 OBD tarp. She walks to the register. The clerk later said she seemed completely calm, not in distress, not looking over her shoulder, not signaling for help. Just a customer. She pays. She picks up her bag. She walks out the door. At 3:17 p.m., just 22 minutes after she exited the store, a Venmo notification lands on her daughter Amanda's phone. It's a transfer of exactly $2,385 from her mom's account. And attached to it is the message, the one that's been seared into the brains of every true crime fan in America for years now. "They are not going to let me go, love you. There is a key in the house in the blue flower pot by the door." That evening, Debbie's husband files a missing person report. The next day, September 11th, at 12:30 p.m., police used the Sirius XM satellite tracking system in the rented minivan to find the vehicle. It's pulled over near State Road 15 in a remote wooded stretch near Tallulah Falls, over 60 miles from her Athens home. 14 minutes later, at 12:44 p.m., a K-9 unit picks up a scent and tracks it down a brutally steep embankment into the gorge. There, they find Debbie. She's deceased. She is naked. Her body is partially burned. She's grasping the trunk of a small tree. Scattered nearby, the items from the Family Dollar, the partially melted blue tarp, the red tote bag, the lighter, everything she had bought less than 24 hours earlier. Now, this is where I need to stop and walk you through why this case became an internet firestorm, because the contradictions here are genuinely unbelievable. Let's start with the kidnapping theory. The theory that the Venmo message means exactly what it appears to mean. They are not going to let me go. That language is unambiguous. It is a hostage message. It implies multiple captors. It implies imminent harm. The instruction about the key in the flower pot reads like a woman trying to make sure her family can access her home after she's killed. It sounds, on its face, like a desperate cry for help. The Habersham County Sheriff's Office, when they first announced the case to the press, said exactly that. They called it deliberate. They called it personal. They specifically stated they did not believe her death was self-inflicted. They said this looked like a targeted attack. But then the Family Dollar surveillance footage came out, and the footage destroys the kidnapping theory. Because think about what we're being asked to believe. If Debbie was kidnapped, her abductors let her drive herself, alone, into a Family Dollar. They let her walk through the store, alone. They let her interact with a clerk, alone. They let her buy the exact items they would supposedly use to murder her, alone. That's not how kidnapping works. Kidnappers do not let their victims shop for the supplies of their own death. Kidnappers do not let their victims send a Venmo with a message that could be read as a help signal. Kidnappers control phones. Kidnappers control money. Kidnappers control movement. The footage shows a calm, uncoerced woman. So the kidnapping interpretation just collapses. There's no way around it. Okay, so let's flip to the official ruling. A self-inflicted death. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation eventually closed the case. They ruled the cause of death as a combination of inhalation of superheated gases, thermal injuries, and hydrocodone intoxication. The medical examiner found no defensive wounds, no signs of no blunt force trauma, no signs of physical struggle. The official theory is that Debbie drove to the mountains with the intention of ending her life. The authorities concluded she consumed a significant amount of prescription medication and utilized the items purchased at the store to carry out the act. A 59-year-old woman with a chronic bad back decides to take her own life in the most agonizing physical manner imaginable. Now let me ask you to sit with that theory for a second and apply common sense to it. A 59-year-old woman with a chronic bad back decides to end her own life by self-immolation. So she chooses the most agonizing, physically punishing method imaginable. Then, she chooses the most physically punishing location imaginable, requiring her to climb down a ravine that would be brutal for a healthy hiker. Then, she sends a Venmo message designed to frame her death as a kidnapping. Then, she takes her clothes off before lighting the fire. Where are her clothes? They were never found. Why send a message that reads like a kidnapping? Why not write a goodbye? Why not write the truth? Why frame her own family by using language that immediately throws suspicion on the people closest to her? These are not typical behaviors for someone in that state of mind. No psychological profile of someone ending their own life looks like this. People who choose to end their lives generally pick the most accessible, least painful method available to them. They don't drive 60 miles, hike into a canyon, and stage a fake abduction text first. And the staging is what drove the internet crazy. Because this scene looks staged. The Venmo message reads like theater. The naked body in the ravine reads like theater. The partial burning, the tree grasped in her final moments, the items scattered like props, all of it has the feel of a tableau, like somebody constructed a scene for an audience. Some armchair detectives have argued that nothing about this case adds up unless you assume someone else was involved. That somebody who knew Debbie well enough to access her phone, her finances, and her movements orchestrated all of this. That the Venmo message wasn't written by Debbie at all. That the calm family dollar trip was Debbie not knowing what was about to happen. That the entire scene was a masterwork of misdirection by a killer who wanted the case to look exactly weird enough to be unsolvable. Other people have looked at the GBI's ruling and said no, the truth is darker and quieter. That Debbie was a woman in a profound private mental health crisis nobody around her could see. That she had decided she was going to leave the world. That she did not want to leave behind the shame of a clean, self-inflicted death. So she built a fog of confusion around her own death. The Venmo message was misdirection, she wrote herself, vague enough to imply something sinister, so her family would never have to face the simple fact that their mother chose to die. Her daughter, Amanda, eventually came out publicly in support of that interpretation. She said she believed her mother had been carrying internal struggles she did not want her family to know about. That this elaborate, devastating final act was Debbie's way of avoiding what she perceived as a quieter shame. The case is officially closed. The GBI is done. There will be no further investigation, no arrest, no trial. The Venmo message, the tarp, the fire, the naked body in the ravine, all of it has been filed away as a highly complex, self-inflicted passing, but the internet hasn't accepted it. True crime forums still pick it apart, podcasters still revisit it, because the gap between the evidence we can see and the conclusion we've been given is just too wide. Either Debbie Collier engineered the most theatrical, agonizing final act in modern memory, or somebody else engineered the most successful staged murder in modern memory, and we, the public, are left forever standing between those two possibilities, unable to fully believe either one. So here's where we land. A 59-year-old woman got in a rented minivan on a sunny Saturday morning. She drove 60 miles into the mountains. She bought a tarp and a lighter at a Family Dollar. She sent her daughter a digital message that read like a hostage note, and she walked into the bottom of a ravine that her own bad back should have made impossible. The official record says she did all of this to herself. Maybe she did. Maybe the woman everyone thought they knew was carrying a private darkness so heavy that she chose to leave the world wrapped in a layer of theater just to protect her family from the simpler, sadder truth. Or maybe the GBI closed the book on a brilliant killer who built a stage in the woods and walked away clean. She bought a tarp. She sent a terrifying text. She walked into the woods, and she became the most confusing internet mystery of the decade. A 25-year-old man wakes up in the middle of the night. He's sick, he's coughing, he's running a fever. His girlfriend tells him to come back to bed. He nods. She closes her eyes. 3.5 hours later, she wakes up to an empty house. His truck is still in the driveway. His keys, his wallet, his cell phone, and his ID are all sitting exactly where he left them. The doors are locked. The house is silent. There's no sign of a struggle, no blood, no knocked over furniture, nothing. Only 3 things are missing: the man himself, the thin flannel pajama pants and t-shirt he had been wearing, and his 9mm handgun. A month later, his body floats up in a freezing cove of Lake Lanier with a bullet wound on it. The police ruled it a self-inflicted death. His family has never accepted that. This is the case of Kelly Nash. And to this day, it's one of the strangest unanswered questions in the long, dark history of Lake Lanier. Let me put you in that setting. It is January 5th, 2015. The location is Buford, Georgia. Specifically, a quiet, comfortable suburban street called Jimmy Dodd Road. In the kind of neighborhood where the houses sit on big lots, the lawns are kept neat, and every backyard eventually drops down toward the same massive dark presence, Lake Lanier. If you don't live in Georgia, let me try to explain Lake Lanier to you. On paper, it's just a man-made reservoir built by the Army Corps of Engineers in the 1950s. 46,000 acres of water. It supplies drinking water to most of metro Atlanta. It's surrounded by some of the wealthiest suburbs in the state, marinas, lake houses, jet skis. On a sunny July day, it's a postcard. But the lake has a reputation, a really, really dark reputation, because when the Army Corps built it, they flooded entire towns to fill the basin. Houses, roads, a racetrack, a cemetery. All of it is still down there, under the water, intact and overgrown with sediment. The lake has claimed an unusual number of lives over the decades. People drown in it under bizarre circumstances. Boats sink. Bodies surface in places that don't quite make sense. Locals will tell you that something about Lake Lanier just doesn't release the people it takes. And on the night of January 5th, 2015, Lake Lanier was an entirely different creature than the summer version. It was the dead of winter. The water temperature was barely above freezing. The air was bitter. The trees around the shore were bare. And at 4 a.m., the entire shoreline was wrapped in a pitch-black, oppressive stillness that you can only feel in deep winter darkness. This was the lake that was about to be involved in Kelly Nash's last hours. Kelly Hansen Nash was 25 years old, a student at Georgia Gwinnett College after having previously spent 4 years at Auburn University. He was a big guy, 6'2", 230 pounds, athletic. He kept up his physical condition. He had been a basketball player in high school. But more than the physical description, you have to understand who Kelly was as a human being. Everyone who knew him, his family, his friends, his old basketball coach, his girlfriend, they all said the same things. He was a relentless hard worker, he was generous, he was deeply caring. He had what one person who knew him called a beautiful mind. He was by every measure exactly the opposite of the kind of person who would just walk away into the night. He didn't have a documented history of mental illness. He didn't have a history of substance abuse. He didn't have a history of running off. He had a stable life, a steady girlfriend, Jessica Sexton, who he lived with, a loving family, a future he was working toward. But there's one variable I need you to hold on to. On the night of January 4th into January 5th, 2015, Kelly was sick. Seriously sick, not the sniffles. He had a respiratory illness, the kind of a brutal flu where you can't stop coughing, you can't sleep, your whole body aches, and a deep fog settles into your head. He had been miserable for hours. Here's the timeline as we know it. Around 4 a.m., Kelly is in the living room of the Jimmy Dodd Roadhouse. He couldn't sleep. He was coughing too hard. He was trying to distract himself by playing video games. Jessica woke up, walked into the living room, and saw him there. She told him to come back to bed and get some real rest. He agreed. That's the last time she saw him alive. At 7:30 a.m., Jessica woke up for the day. She walked through the house. Kelly was gone. She started checking. His truck was in the driveway. His wallet sitting where he always put it. His cell phone, the same. His keys, his ID, all of it, untouched. The doors of the house were locked from the inside except for the garage door, which was slightly ajar. Not flung open, not broken, just slightly cracked. Two things, and only two things, were missing along with Kelly. The thin flannel pajama pants and dark t-shirt he had been wearing when she last saw him, and a 9mm handgun, along with its clip that had been stored in a case inside the house. That's it. That's the scene. A grown man, in the middle of a freezing January night, walked out of his garage in pajamas and bare or near bare feet, leaving behind every single thing a person needs to function in the modern world, and took only a firearm with him. A massive manhunt kicked off. The family put up a $50,000 reward. Helicopters flew over the area. Search and rescue teams combed the woods around the neighborhood. For a solid month, this case dominated local news in North Georgia. And on February 8, 2015, at 5:54 p.m., a fisherman pulled up to a quiet, secluded cove of Lake Lanier near Shadburn Ferry Road. He saw something in the water. He called the police. It was Kelly. His body had been in the lake for the better part of a month. He was found roughly 2.5 miles from his front door. Now this is where I have to stop and pull every single piece of this apart, because the more you look at it, the less sense it makes. Let's start with the freezing cold. It was January. In Georgia, January nights dropped down into the 20s and 30s. Kelly was sick. He had a severe respiratory illness. A guy in his condition, even at his most miserable, is craving warmth. He's wrapped in a blanket. He's drinking hot tea. He's not interested in being cold. So picture him walking out of that garage in his pajama pants and t-shirt. No coat, no shoes, or maybe just flip-flops. No socks, no hat, no anything. If he had decided, in a moment of fever delirium, that he needed to leave the house, why wouldn't he take his truck? It was right there in the driveway. The keys were sitting where he could grab them. A truck is shelter. It's warmth. It's mobility. You don't walk 2.5 miles in January barefoot in pajamas when there's a perfectly working vehicle 10 feet away from you. And if he was so out of it that he forgot about the truck, then how was he simultaneously lucid enough to remember to retrieve a firearm from its case before leaving? That's the first major contradiction. The behavior of a man so delirious he doesn't take a coat does not match the behavior of a man so lucid he carefully grabs a 9mm and its clip. Now, let's talk about the gun. He took the gun. He left the phone. Think about that for a second. In 2015, if you hear a noise outside in the middle of the night, what do? You grab your phone. Because if there's an intruder, you might need to call 911. You grab your phone first, and maybe then you grab a weapon to defend yourself while you wait for the police. You don't leave the phone behind. The phone is the lifeline, unless you don't intend to call anyone. The fact that Kelly took the gun and left the phone means whatever he was doing, he wasn't interested in talking to anyone outside the house. He wasn't calling 911. He wasn't calling his girlfriend. He wasn't calling his family. So now we're looking at 3 scenarios. Scenario 1. He heard something outside. He grabbed his gun to investigate, intentionally leaving the phone because he wanted to handle it himself, and was then ambushed in his own yard. But this scenario has a giant problem. He was a 25-year-old, 230-pound athletic man holding a 9mm pistol. How does an attacker disarm and silence that guy in his own yard, in a quiet suburban neighborhood, without firing a single shot or making a single sound that would wake up Jessica or any of the neighbors? Nobody heard anything that night. Scenario 2. He walked out of the house under his own power, with no struggle, and went somewhere voluntarily. But voluntarily for what? In pajamas, in freezing cold, sick, without his phone? Scenario 3. The official ruling. He was suffering from extreme fever-induced delirium combined with some sudden mental health crisis nobody saw coming, and he walked himself 2.5 miles to the lake to take his own life. Let's hammer that third scenario, the official one, because it's the one the case turns on. Initially, when his body was found, Hall County investigators told the press they did not suspect foul play. They were leaning hard toward accidental drowning. The story was that Kelly, sick and delirious, had wandered into the freezing night, gotten disoriented near the lake, and fallen in. Then, in April, 3 months after he was found, came the bombshell. The medical examiner had discovered a gunshot wound on Kelly's body. Suddenly, the case wasn't a delirious accident. It was either a self-inflicted gunshot or it was a murder. And here's the part that has driven Kelly's family crazy for over a decade. The Hall County Sheriff's Office has never publicly disclosed exactly where the bullet wound was on his body. They've never disclosed the trajectory. They've never disclosed whether the angle is physically possible for a self-inflicted shot. Why does that matter? Because the physical evidence and forensics of the wound are the single most important pieces of the puzzle in determining if this was self-inflicted or homicide. A self-inflicted wound carries very specific physical markers. A homicide can look entirely different. If the official ruling was confidently self-inflicted death, you'd expect them to share that detail to put the family's questions to rest. The fact that they've held it back has fed the doubts that have followed this case ever since. And then there's the route problem. Lake Lanier near Shadburn Ferry Road is 2.5 miles from Jimmy Dodd Road. To get there, a person would have to cross neighborhood streets, walk past dozens of houses, possibly traverse some main road segments. In January 2015, that area already had security cameras on a lot of properties. Ring doorbells were just starting to become common. Cars were passing through, even at pre-dawn hours. A 230-pound man walking through suburbia in pajamas with a handgun at 4 or 5 a.m. would, you would think, register on something. On a camera, on a passing driver's memory, on a dog that barked at the wrong moment. Nothing. No footage, no witness, no record of his journey from the front door of his home to the cold cove of the lake where he was eventually found. The miles between his house and the water are essentially blank. Documentaries, including an investigation discovery special called Gone in Georgia, have given voice to the alternative theory. That Kelly heard a noise outside, he grabbed his gun. He went into the yard to check. He was then disarmed, kidnapped, transported to the lake, shot and dumped, with the staging meant to look like a confused sick man's tragic mistake. Is that theory clean? No. It has its own logic gaps. Where's the motive? Why him? But it explains things the self-inflicted death theory can't. The pajamas, the missing phone, the lack of any cameras catching him, the hidden trajectory of the gunshot wound. So here's where we land. Kelly Nash's family has never publicly accepted the official ruling. They've spent a decade asking the same questions. Where exactly was the wound? Was the angle consistent with a self-inflicted shot? How does a sick man walk barefoot through freezing darkness for 2.5 miles, leaving no trace on any camera, on any street? The Hall County Sheriff's Office considers the case closed. Lake Lanier, that vast dark presence at the edge of the neighborhood, the lake that has swallowed so many people over so many decades, under so many strange circumstances, kept one more secret on the night of January 5th, 2015. He woke up with a cough. He walked out into the freezing dark, and somewhere between his garage door and the cold cove on Shadburn Ferry Road, Kelly Nash became another shadow at the bottom of the lake. A 19-year-old girl, brand new to Georgia, with no car and no friends in this part of the state, somehow ends up 40 miles outside of Atlanta in a tiny mill town she has no business being in. She pulls out her phone. She films a short video of herself walking through a quiet park, the camera angle a little weird, a little casual. In the background of that video, walking behind her, is a man. She posts it to Instagram. The video goes up. The timestamp locks into the cloud. And then her phone goes dark forever. That post was her last digital heartbeat. And for the next 7 years, almost everyone investigating her case, including her own family, didn't even know that post existed. They had the wrong day. They had the wrong place. They had the wrong story entirely. This is the case of Morgan Bauer. And the way the truth finally came out is one of the strangest, most modern stories in true crime. A quick note before we dig in. This case was eventually solved in 2023 and 2024. So unlike a lot of the disappearances we cover, we actually know what happened to Morgan. But the story of how the truth stayed buried for 7 years and what almost let her killers get away with it forever is the real mystery here. Let me put you in the moment. The year is 2016. February. Morgan Bauer is 19 years old. She has just packed up her life in Aberdeen, South Dakota, a small, cold, quiet city about as far from the bustle of the American South as you can get, and she has flown to Atlanta, Georgia. Why? Because she was 19, and she wanted a new life. She wanted to start over. She wanted to chase whatever it is that 19-year-olds chase when they decide their hometown is too small for them. She had almost nothing. A few dollars in her pocket, a backpack, a phone, and the address of a roommate she had met on Craigslist. Let me say that last part again. A Craigslist roommate in 2016 Atlanta with informal terms where Morgan was going to clean the house in exchange for a place to stay until she could find real work. Now, in fairness, that arrangement is not automatically sinister. Plenty of young people have used Craigslist to find roommates and survived just fine. But it does tell you something important about Morgan's situation. She had no safety net in Georgia, no family, no friends, no established support system. She was, in the truest sense, alone in a city of 6 million people. Atlanta in 2016 was and is a complicated place. It's beautiful in patches and unforgiving in others. It's a metropolis where you can absolutely thrive if you've got the right connections, the right job, the right neighborhood. And it's a metropolis where you can completely disappear if you don't. Morgan was about to find out which version of Atlanta she had landed in. She arrived on February 12, 2016. Within days, the Craigslist roommate situation fell apart. Morgan was suddenly homeless in a city she had been in for less than 2 weeks. Now here's the thing about Morgan, and I want to give her credit for this because it matters. She didn't fold. She didn't call her mom and beg to come home. She hustled. She found work, fast, dancing at an adult club called the Top of Gainesville up in Hall County. It wasn't the dream, but it was money, and it kept her moving. But this is also where her life got chaotic in a way that any criminologist will tell you makes a young woman incredibly vulnerable. Her sleep schedule was upside down. She was meeting strangers every night. She had no fixed address. She had no daily routine that anyone could verify. If she went missing for a day or two, people might assume she was just busy or crashing somewhere new. What stayed constant, the one tether that connected her to the world she came from, was her phone. Morgan was a digital native. She was 19 in 2016. Her phone was her oxygen. She texted her mom back in South Dakota constantly. She posted on Instagram. She was on social media throughout the day. Her phone was her lifeline, her map, her shield against feeling alone in a strange city. That detail is going to matter more than anything else in this story. Let me walk you through what investigators believed happened for almost 7 years. The official timeline, the one law enforcement worked from for the better part of a decade, looked like this. On February 25, 2016, Morgan finished a shift at the club. She left the building with several people. They reportedly dropped her off at a Citgo gas station on Highway 278 in Covington, Georgia. That was it. That was the story. The Citgo on the night of February 25th was, for 7 years, considered her last known location. The presumption was that she had been picked up there by whoever and absorbed into the kind of metropolitan underworld that swallows young, vulnerable women. The going theory, whispered for years, was trafficking. Atlanta has a documented problem with trafficking. Morgan fit the profile. Newcomer, no family in town, working in adult entertainment. The case looked like 1,000 other tragic cases that get filed away and never solved. For 7 years, that's where everyone was looking. The wrong night, the wrong town, the wrong story. And here's where the mystery becomes a modern mystery in a way no case from 40 years ago could ever be. In 2023, 7 years after Morgan vanished, a former friend of Morgan's reached out to her mother. The friend had a screenshot of an Instagram video. The video had been posted on Morgan's private Instagram account. The post was dated February 26, 2016. That's 1 full day after Morgan was supposedly last seen at the Citgo. The video was short. It showed Morgan walking through a park, casually filming herself. The location, when investigators geolocated it, was the Yellow River Park in Porterdale, Georgia. Porterdale is a small, quiet, historic mill town about 40 miles southeast of Atlanta. Old red brick buildings, dense southern woods crowding in, a slow, murky river running through it. And in the background of that video, walking behind Morgan, was a man. Let that sink in. For 7 years, the entire investigation had been chasing a ghost in the wrong town on the wrong day. The actual last known location of Morgan Bauer was a park 40 miles outside of Atlanta that nobody had been looking at, because the data was hiding behind the privacy settings of a 19-year-old's Instagram account. So now let's start tearing this thing apart with the logic gap. Question 1. Why was Morgan in Porterdale at all? She didn't have a car. She didn't have a driver. She didn't have any friends in Porterdale that anyone in her life knew about. She had no logical reason to be in that specific small town in Newton County on February 26, 2016. So somebody got her there. Somebody drove her 40 miles outside of Atlanta to a place where nobody in her support network would think to look for her. A small-town girl from South Dakota does not navigate herself alone on a whim to a random park in a random mill town she has never heard of. Somebody brought her there, which means by the time that Instagram video was filmed, Morgan was already deep inside someone else's plan. Question 2. Why does her phone go silent after that post? Think about a 19-year-old in 2016. The phone never stops. They text, they scroll, they check Snapchat 10 times an hour. They message their mom. Their phone is an extension of their nervous system. People that age do not turn off their phones for no reason. Not for hours, not for days, not forever. The fact that Morgan's phone went dark seconds after that Instagram video posted is not a choice. It's an event. Something happened to that phone and to Morgan within minutes, maybe seconds, of that final post going live. Question 3. Who is the man in the video? Because once you know that Morgan was in Porterdale, and once you can see a man walking behind her in the frame, you have a starting point. You have a face. You have a location. You have a moment in time. And that is where the case finally cracked. In July of 2023, FBI agents and Georgia Bureau of Investigation officers descended on a specific property in Porterdale. They brought heavy machinery, they tore up the yard, they sifted through the dirt, and they found what they called items of evidentiary interest. What they actually found was Morgan. Her skeletal remains had been scattered across the property for 7 years, hidden right where the killers had left her. The Instagram video was the breadcrumb that brought investigators to the exact geographic coordinates of her death. Within weeks, 2 suspects were identified and arrested. Jonathan Alexander Warren, arrested in California. Caitlin Goebel, arrested in Illinois. They were not strangers operating in some vast trafficking network. They were a local pair who had crossed paths with Morgan, lured her or accompanied her to that Porterdale property, and killed her there. In 2024, Jonathan Alexander Warren pleaded guilty in Newton County Court. He pleaded guilty to malice murder. He pleaded guilty to tampering with evidence. He pleaded guilty to concealing the death of another. He pleaded guilty to an additional charge regarding the severe mistreatment of her remains, a detail that underscores the grim reality of the crime. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong or a trafficking transaction. It was a thrill killing carried out by 2 people who took Morgan's life and then went to disturbing lengths to destroy the forensic evidence. They scattered her bones in the dirt of that Porterdale property and assumed nobody would ever find her. Jonathan Warren is now serving life in prison without the possibility of parole. And here's the part of the story that should haunt anyone who works in law enforcement. For 7 years, the truth about Morgan Bauer was sitting on a server, locked behind the privacy settings of an Instagram account. The video had been posted. The data had been preserved. The geolocation was embedded in the imagery. The man's face was in the frame. But the investigation was looking in the wrong town on the wrong day for the wrong kind of crime. If a friend hadn't kept that screenshot, if she hadn't eventually reached out to Morgan's mother, if Morgan's mother hadn't relentlessly fought, traveling from South Dakota to Georgia over and over and over again across 7 brutal years, refusing to let the case die, refusing to accept the official timeline, refusing to let her daughter become a forgotten file. If any of those things hadn't happened, Jonathan Warren and Caitlin Goebel would still be free. Morgan's bones would still be in the dirt, and the world would still believe she was last seen at a Citgo on the wrong night. So here's where this case leaves us. Morgan Bauer got on a plane in South Dakota with a few dollars to her name and a head full of dreams. She landed in a city that doesn't catch you when you fall. She survived for 2 weeks. She hustled, she fought, she kept her phone in her hand because her phone was the only thread connecting her to everyone she loved. And on the afternoon of February 26, 2016, in a quiet park in a town she had no reason to be in, she filmed a short video. She posted it. The screen on her phone glowed for a few more seconds, and then it went dark forever. She came halfway across the country to start a new life. She was killed within 2 weeks of arriving. Her body lay in pieces in a stranger's yard for 7 years, and the only thing that stopped her killers from getting away with it forever was a single Instagram post and a mother who would not stop digging. She posted a video of a walk in the park. The screen went black, and the truth was buried in the dirt of Porterdale for 7 long years. Two teenage girls walk into a gas station on a Sunday afternoon. They buy a bag of chips and a couple of sodas. The clerk knows them. He chats with them. He watches them walk back out the front door into the late afternoon sunlight. That's it. That's the last verified moment that anyone outside their family ever saw Danette and Jeanette Milbrook alive. They were 15 years old. They were 2 weeks away from their sweet 16th birthday. They were walking home on a route they had walked 100 times before, in a neighborhood where they knew every porch and every face. And somewhere between that gas station and their front door, in a stretch of maybe a few city blocks, both of them disappeared. At the same time, without a scream, without a witness, without a trace. This is the case of the Milbrook twins. And what happened next, what the police did, or more accurately what they didn't do, is almost as disturbing as the disappearance itself. Let me set the scene. It's March 18th, 1990, Augusta, Georgia, a Sunday. The weather was mild, around 66 degrees, the kind of comfortable spring day where the whole neighborhood is out on porches, kids are riding bikes, and the streets feel alive. The neighborhood was a tight working-class community on the city's south side. We're talking about the corridor around Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, Laney Walker Boulevard, and 12th Street. This was a predominantly African-American part of Augusta, and like a lot of inner-city neighborhoods in 1990, it had two faces. On one hand, it was a place where everyone knew everyone. Grandmothers sat on front porches, fanning themselves. Kids cut through backyards on their way to friends' houses. Corner stores were extensions of people's living rooms. But on the other hand, the early 90s in cities like Augusta were a hard time. Economic decline, drugs creeping in, crime statistics climbing, the kind of neighborhood where people watched out for each other, but also where they were starting to lock their doors more often than they used to. And in the middle of all this, doing the most normal teenage thing in the world, were Danette and Jeanette Milbrook. The twins were fraternal, not identical, but they were inseparable. Danette was 5 feet 6 inches, a little taller, and visibly bow-legged. Jeanette was 5 feet 4 inches. They both wore their hair in shoulder-length jerry curls, the signature style of the era. They both had pierced ears. They both had matching little surgical scars above their navels from procedures they'd had as babies. That day, Jeanette was wearing a blue pullover shirt over a white turtleneck, a beige skirt, white stockings, and white sneakers. Danette was wearing a white Mickey Mouse shirt, white jeans, and black shoes. I want you to picture them because the specificity of these details matter. They weren't dressed for a getaway. They were dressed like 15-year-olds running errands on a Sunday. The girls were 9th graders at Lucy Laney High School. They were good kids, not perfect, just normal. Helpful at home, polite to neighbors. They had a brand new baby sister they absolutely adored. They had zero history of running away. Zero history of trouble, zero reason to leave. They were the kind of girls who spent hours sitting on the front porch watching the world go by. Homebodies, anchored to their family, anchored to that neighborhood. Now, let's walk through that Sunday afternoon, because the timeline tells you something really chilling. Earlier in the day, the twins had walked to Church's Chicken to grab a bite to eat. On the way back, they noticed something. A man in a white van was following them. Slowly, watching them. When they got home, they told their mother about it. They were unsettled enough to mention it, but this was 1990, and a strange car cruising the neighborhood wasn't, sadly, anything new. So they went on with their day. Mid-afternoon, they walked over to their godfather's house. The reason was practical and totally mundane. They needed $20 for the upcoming week's school bus fare. They got the money. Routine errand. But here's where the day takes a turn that, in hindsight, breaks your heart. After getting the money, they stopped by their cousin's house, and the girls explicitly asked their cousin to walk them home, not because they wanted company, because they were scared. The cousin's mother said no. So they went to their older sister's house next, and they asked her the same thing. Please walk us home. The older sister had just had a baby. She was recovering from childbirth. She said she couldn't. 2 failed attempts to get an escort. 2 times the girls said out loud, "Please don't make us walk alone." Now, this is the part that should have been an enormous red flag the moment they were reported missing, because runaways don't ask for escorts. Runaways don't try to get adults to walk them home. The Milbrook twins were doing the exact opposite of running. They were trying to stay safe. They were prey, and they knew it. At 4:30 p.m., they walked into the Pump and Shop gas station at the corner of 12th Street and MLK Jr. Boulevard. The clerk on duty was a woman named Gloria. She knew the twins. She rang up their chips and sodas. She watched them push open the glass door, step out into the fading afternoon light, and start walking home. Their apartment was just a short distance away, minutes on foot. That walk took them off the face of the earth. Nobody saw them again. Not a neighbor, not a passing driver, not a single porch-sitting grandmother on a block full of porch-sitting grandmothers. They simply ceased to exist somewhere between that gas station and their front door. Now this is where I have to stop and tear the official theory apart, because the police response to this disappearance was, frankly, a disgrace. Let me ask you to think this through with me. 2 15-year-old girls vanish from a city street in broad daylight. They have no money for an escape, just enough to buy snacks. They have no packed bags. They have no destination. They had spent the entire afternoon trying to get someone to walk them home because they were scared of a man in a white van. They have a baby sister at home they adore. What did the Richmond County Sheriff's Office decide? Runaways. That was it. That was the call. 2 girls who were terrified of a stalker, who were 2 weeks from their sweet 16th, who had told their own family about being followed, were dismissed as voluntary runaways. Let's break that theory down. If you're running away forever, what do you take? Money, clothes, a bag, something, anything. The Milbrook twins took a bag of chips and 2 sodas. They took $20 in bus fare for the school week they were planning to attend. That's not a getaway fund. That's a Sunday afternoon. If you're running away, you have somewhere to run. You have a friend, a relative, a boyfriend, a destination. The twins had no boyfriends, no out-of-town contacts, no plans. Their entire world was a 4-block radius. And here's the logic gap that just floors me every time. If you're running away together, you don't ask your cousin and your older sister to walk you home first. That makes 0 sense. You don't seek protection on the very day you're planning to disappear. You don't ask for an escort if you're the one orchestrating the vanishing act. Now let's flip it. Let's say they were taken. If they were abducted, you run into the second logic problem. How do you grab 2 teenage girls off a city sidewalk in broad daylight without anyone hearing a scream? Think about the mechanics for a second. Grabbing 1 person is hard. Grabbing 2 is exponentially harder. The math doesn't multiply, it explodes. If you grab 1, the other has a head start. She runs, she screams, she gets a license plate. So a single attacker abduction of 2 teenagers is almost impossible. That leaves you with 2 real options. Either multiple attackers coordinated to take them both at once, or they got into a vehicle voluntarily with someone they thought they could trust who turned out to be the threat. And given that they'd just told their mother that a man in a white van was watching them, you start to see the awful shape of what probably happened. But the police saw none of that, because they had already decided what the story was. Here's where the case goes from tragic to infuriating. The police closed the case in 1991. Just over a year after the twins vanished, the file was shut. The Richmond County Sheriff's Office stopped actively investigating. And the reasons they gave the family for closing it? They were all over the map, and none of them were true. First, they told the family that the girls were 17 years old and they couldn't be forced to come home. The girls were 15. Then, they told the family that a juvenile officer had located the twins. He hadn't. The officer the family was directed to didn't even know what they were talking about. Then, they suggested the girls had been placed in foster care and quietly adopted out, which again, never happened. There was no record, no paper trail, no anything. The lies just kept coming, and the family kept asking questions, and the police kept brushing them off. Then somewhere along the way, the original case file just disappeared. Lost. Gone. The chain of custody for whatever witness statements and physical evidence had been collected in 1990 was completely broken. And then, the final indignity. For decades, the twins' names were spelled wrong in national missing persons databases. The surname was logged as Milbrooks, with an S on the end that didn't belong there. Jeanette's middle name was butchered too. So even when investigators or journalists or family members searched for them in national systems, the records didn't come up. They were ghosts in the database, on top of being ghosts in real life. The Milbrook family fought for decades, just trying to get someone to take their daughter's case seriously, and they had to do it themselves. The case finally started getting traction, not because the police pursued it, but because of journalism. A true crime podcast called The Fall Line, which focuses specifically on under-investigated cases in the South, dedicated serious time and resources to the Milbrook story. They dug into the original timeline. They tracked down witnesses. They forced the case back into public conversation. In 1993, 3 years after the twins vanished, skeletal remains of a young black female were found in Aiken County, South Carolina, just across the river. The family looked at the facial reconstruction and thought it might be Jeanette. Investigators initially dismissed the connection without explanation. It took years and years before DNA analysis was finally run on those remains, which ultimately ruled out a match. Criminologists who've looked at the case have pointed to a few possibilities. There was a man named Joseph Patrick Washington, a serial predator who was very active in Augusta at exactly that time, in exactly that neighborhood. He was later convicted of multiple abductions and he died in 1999, serving 17 life terms. The timing fits. The geography fits. Whether he had anything to do with the twins, we may never know. And then there's the man in the white van. The unidentified stalker the twins themselves told their mother about hours before they vanished. He has never been found, never been identified, never spoken to. So here's where we land. It's been 36 years. Danette and Jeanette Milbrook would be in their early 50s now. They would have lived entire adult lives, maybe had children, maybe become grandmothers, maybe taken their baby sister out for her birthday every year. Instead, two 15-year-old girls walked out of a gas station on a Sunday afternoon, started the short walk home, and were swallowed by something nobody can explain. They asked for help. They told people they were being followed. They begged for an escort. And every adult who could have walked them home that day didn't. They went to get a snack. They bought chips and sodas. And 30-plus years later, we still don't know where they went. Picture a quiet country road in North Georgia. It's late October. The leaves are turning. The air has that first real bite of fall in it. The sun is just slipping behind the tree line, and the woods on either side of the road are starting to go from gold and orange to deep, swallowing black. An 11-year-old boy is riding home on his red bicycle. He's done this ride 100 times. It's less than a mile. He knows every dip in the pavement, every mailbox, every dog that barks behind every fence. He's pedaling fast because he knows he's supposed to be home before full dark. He never makes it. His bike is found the next morning in a ditch on the side of the road. His body is found the day after that, miles away, dumped in a forest. He had been shot. It happened in a window of maybe 10 or 15 minutes, on a paved road that locals used as a commuter route at exactly the time of day when traffic should have been heaviest. And nobody, not one single human being driving home from work that evening, saw a thing. This is the case of Levi Frady. And almost 30 years later, his killer is still out there. Let me put you in the moment. The date is October 22nd, 1997. The location is Forsyth County, Georgia. Specifically, a stretch of pavement called Little Mill Road, which cuts through the rural northern part of the county between Highway 306 and Highway 369. I want you to really understand what Forsyth County felt like in 1997, because it matters. This was right at the edge of the great suburban explosion that would eventually swallow it. In '97, Forsyth was caught in between two worlds. On one side, it was still genuinely country. Farms, cattle, long gravel driveways, houses separated from each other by acres of pine timber and hardwood. People knew their neighbors. They knew their neighbors' kids. Doors stayed unlocked. On the other side, Atlanta was creeping north. New subdivisions were being carved out. New commuters were moving in from the city, working in Atlanta, driving home up Highway 400 to their slice of country quiet. Little Mill Road, by that fall, was a paved, well-traveled commuter route. Not a major highway, but absolutely a road that had traffic moving on it at 6:30 in the evening on a Wednesday. And just across the county line sat Dawson Forest, thousands of acres of rugged, wild, mostly unmapped wilderness, the kind of place where you could disappear a body forever if you knew the unpaved service roads. Hunters used it, locals knew it, outsiders got lost in it. There was one more thing about that specific Wednesday. The next morning, October 23rd, was opening day for rifle deer hunting season inside Dawson Forest. Every hunter in northeast Georgia knew that date by heart. It was a calendar landmark. Hold on to that fact. We're coming back to it. Levi Frady was 11 years old, a sixth grader at North Forsyth Middle School. By every account from his family, his teachers, and his friends, Levi was just a happy, normal country kid. He loved being outside. He loved his bike. He spent his afternoons riding around his neighborhood with friends, the way kids did in the '90s before phones and screens ate up all that freedom. Levi was a kid who knew his route. He knew which houses to wave at. He knew which dogs to avoid. He knew the exact dip in the road where you could pick up speed if you pedaled hard. The walk and the ride between his home and his friends' houses were second nature. He had done this trip dozens and dozens of times. He was also a rule follower. He knew he had to be home before dark. He was not a wanderer. He was not a runaway. He had no reason to be anywhere except home. If Levi had survived October 22nd, 1997, he would be 39 years old today. Let me walk you through that afternoon. Levi spent the day doing exactly what every kid in Forsyth County was doing that crisp autumn afternoon. He was outside. He was with friends. He was playing. There's nothing sinister or unusual about a single moment of his afternoon. It was the most ordinary day of an ordinary kid's life. As the sun started dipping, Levi knew it was time to head home. He hopped on his red bicycle. The distance from his friend's house to his own front door was less than a mile. We're not talking about a long, dangerous trek. We're talking about a ride that should have taken him 5 or 6 minutes, maximum. He pushed off into the pavement around dusk, approximately 6:30 p.m. And somewhere between his friend's driveway and his front porch, in a stretch of road no longer than a few football fields, Levi Frady vanished. When Levi didn't come home, his mother and his sister got worried fast. They knew their kid. They knew his routine. They started looking. They called his friends. They drove the route. They called the Forsyth County authorities. Sometime that night, his bicycle was located. It was on the shoulder of Little Mill Road, just lying there. Not crashed, not tangled in a fence, just left. The next day, the search expanded. Volunteers, neighbors, deputies. And then, in the wooded ravines of Dawson Forest, miles across the county line, somebody found Levi. He had been shot. Multiple times, his body had been dumped in a remote section of the forest, the kind of section you'd only know how to get to if you'd spent real time in those woods. Now this is where I have to stop and really dig into the impossibility of what happened on that road. Let's start with the timing. 6:30 p.m. on a Wednesday in October. That is, by definition, peak evening traffic time. People driving home from work in Cumming or Atlanta. Parents driving home from picking up kids from after-school activities. Hunters and outdoorsmen heading into the area to scout for opening day the next morning. Little Mill Road was not deserted. It was a paved road that real human beings used. Cars were passing. So picture this. A predator pulls over. Levi is on his bike. Maybe the driver waves him down, asks him a question, pretends to be lost. Maybe the driver grabs him fast. The bike has to be moved off the road and dropped in a ditch. Levi has to be forced into a vehicle. The vehicle has to drive away. That whole sequence takes time, maybe a minute, maybe 2, maybe 3 if the kid fights. In that window, on a commuter road, at dusk, somebody's headlights should have come around the bend. Somebody should have seen a car pulled over and a man wrestling with a kid. Somebody should have remembered seeing a red bicycle thrown into a ditch. Nobody saw a thing. That tells you the predator's timing was impossibly perfect, or more likely that the predator knew that road. He knew when the gaps in traffic would be. He knew where to pull over. He knew how to look like nothing was happening in the seconds before a headlight swept across the scene. This was not a random opportunity. This was a man who had watched that road. Then there's the body dump. Dawson Forest is not a place you stumble into. It's miles from Little Mill Road. To dump a body there, you have to drive across the county line. You have to navigate roads that in 1997 were mostly unpaved service trails. In the dark, with a victim in your vehicle. A random drifter, an out-of-state traveler, a stranger to North Georgia does not do this. They dump the body close to where they grabbed the kid, or they go to the nearest body of water. They do not navigate a specific Forest Service road into a specific ravine in a specific wildlife management area. The choice of Dawson Forest tells you something crucial about who took Levi. This was a local, or at least, this was someone who knew Dawson Forest the way you know your own backyard. A hunter, a trapper, a property owner with adjacent land, a person who had been in those woods many, many times before. Which brings us back to the date. October 23rd, the morning after Levi was taken, was opening day for rifle deer hunting season. Every serious hunter in North Georgia was scouting Dawson Forest the day before. Some came in from out of town. Some came up from Atlanta. Some lived right there in Forsyth. A lot of investigators and a lot of local theorists have looked hard at this overlap. Was the killer a hunter? Was he a guy who came into the area a day early, knew the woods because he hunted them, opportunistically encountered Levi on the road and used a rifle that he had with him for the hunt the next morning? It fits. The geography fits, the timing fits, the choice of dump site fits, and the influx of out-of-town hunters the next morning would have provided perfect cover for an outsider to slip back home and disappear into the rest of his life. But here's the gap. It's a theory. There's never been a hunter linked to this case. There's never been a name. There's never been a confession. There's never been a piece of physical evidence that named a person. What there was were the sketches. 2 witnesses came forward with accounts that put 2 different unidentified men in the geographic nexus of this crime. The first man was seen walking along Little Mill Road at exactly 6:30 p.m., the exact time and exact road where Levi vanished. He was described as a white male in his late 50s, faded blue baseball cap, scruffy gray beard, and he had a distinctive walk, a kind of stooped, hunched-over gait that witnesses found memorable. The second man was spotted inside Dawson Forest itself, where Levi's body was eventually found. He was described as a clean-shaven white male, 45 to 55 years old, slim build, gray or white hair, 6 feet tall, and he was driving a very specific vehicle. A 1980 to 1985 medium blue Toyota 2-wheel drive pickup with a white camper shell on the back. Police sketches of both men were created. They were plastered across the state for years. Both faces are still on cold case bulletins. And after almost 30 years of public exposure, despite the specific descriptions, despite the very specific truck, neither of those men has ever been identified. Were they connected? Was one the killer and the other a witness? Were they working together? Or are they 2 completely unrelated coincidences, just 2 strangers who happen to be in the wrong places at the wrong times? Nobody knows, and nobody has come forward. The case shook the state, and out of that shock came something that has actually saved lives, because law enforcement in 1997 had no rapid way to alert the public about a child abduction. By the time Levi's family knew he was missing, by the time deputies started searching, by the time word got out to the broader community, hours had passed. Critical hours, hours when his abductor was already moving him to Dawson Forest. Georgia officials looked at that failure and decided it could not happen again. They built a statewide emergency broadcast system specifically for child abductions. They named it after the boy whose case proved the need for it. They called it Levi's Call. It's Georgia's version of the Amber Alert. It partners with broadcasters, highway message boards, and now cell phones to push abduction details out to the public within minutes of a confirmed case. Levi's Call has saved an enormous number of children since 1997, dozens of recoveries, kids who came home because the public was alerted fast. But here's the heartbreak. Levi's Call has saved many other children. The boy it's named after has never gotten justice. The men in the sketches have never been identified. The hunter, if it was a hunter, has aged into his 70s or 80s or has already taken the secret to the grave. So here's where we land. An 11-year-old boy got on his red bicycle on a crisp autumn evening in 1997. He pushed off down a road he knew by heart. He was less than a mile from his own front porch. Cars were passing, the leaves were turning. Dinner was waiting. And somewhere in that short ride, somewhere in that small window between dusk and dark, a monster who knew that road and knew those woods stepped out of the trees and into Levi's life. He's still out there. Levi was just a mile from his front door, riding his red bike in the autumn dusk, and the monsters hiding in the woods won.